All right, we are back. This is Long Run Archives number 28. I made a mistake last episode. I said it was the 26th edition. It was the 27th. I've just lost track of how many of these we've done. Also, noticeably absent is trusty longtime co-host Brett Hornig, who I believe is on the road hanging out with the team at Running Warehouse down in San Luis Obispo. So dearly missed, but on a pretty cool mission down there, hanging with some of the coolest people in the shoe game. I think we start with Western States. There's been quite a bit of news that has transpired just in the last 3 or 4 days around it. It was being billed as perhaps the deepest field in this race ever, and maybe the most competitive race on American soil this year across distances. But the men's field in particular has taken a hit. Jim Walmsley, Jon Rea, Hayden Hawks are now officially out. Jeff, reactions. What did you think when you first heard this news?
I think it's worth noting that Dan Green is in, and
and it's specifically the replacement for Jim, right? Like, yeah, I like that they show that. I think that's new, isn't it? That they show who's replacing from the wait list when people pull out.
Yeah. I think it changes the dynamic of the race significantly, and I'm of the opinion that it was Jim's race to lose. I think it's hard to bet against the 4-time returning champion. Hayden Hawks, obviously a contender in that as well, having come second and third and shown some amazing fitness earlier this year. I'm great friends with Jon Rea. Really bummed about the news on his end with his injury. But at the front of the race, this in a lot of ways blows it wide open, because there was only one runner, I think, really in Western States this year who could play with their food, and that was Jim. He could likely push the pace or totally relax the pace at his will. And we've seen him do that with other runners in previous years. So taking such a mental competitor who also is the most experienced out of the men's field will definitely change it significantly.
Do you think it's any more or less exciting without Jim? Because I think with Jim in the race, right, there's this I think we all kind of had this really exciting sort of curiosity, like, is Jim going to win this thing for the 5th time? But also, like, is there anyone that can beat him? There was that possibility, right? Like, Rod almost did it last year. And I think we feel like there's a lot of players in this cast this year that maybe could have beat him this year. But now we also have the excitement of, I don't think it's any less exciting taking that question out and now seeing all right, maybe we're taking the outlier out, if he was an outlier.
I think we're going to see kind of in weeks leading up, and I think some folks got a hint of this last year with Rod. In weeks leading up, people were like, Rod seems incredibly fit, and he also has this mental focus that we haven't seen from him before. I think people were starting to put more bets on Rod for Western States last year. I think this month, we're going to see who has that self-belief at the level that they're not intimidated that Jim is out of the field. They're not changing their game plan. They have the poise and confidence to show up, and they're going to control the race. So kind of wonder who's going to step into that light. And I think there are a number of folks who definitely could, but with just watching some recent fitness, Adam Peterman, Killian, Caleb, David, I think there's a number of players who would gladly step up and just say, I'm going to run this race gun to gun and make it my race to control.
In my opinion, the biggest loss here is just the fact that these two guys have 10 years of well-deserved name recognition, and they've reached a point in the sport where they bring viewers to the live stream purely because of their history in the sport. But I also believe that there are 15 to 20 guys in this field that are at or just below their ability level, and at the very least will be trying their best to be there at Michigan Bluff, at Forest Hill, at the river, etc. So, if it had turned out differently and Jim and Hayden were in the race, but instead the news was we lost Caleb Olson, Jeff McGavro, and Dan Jones, from a talent standpoint, we would be feeling the same level of hurt in this field, right? All of those guys are going to be contending with Jim and Hayden in a perfect world. So to me, the biggest loss is just when we were watching the live stream on the 4th Saturday in June, maybe we lose just a little bit of fandom because those names aren't there. But I think it's going to be an extremely compelling race, even without them. Like the field is so deep that from like a quality standpoint, whoever gets on that podium, it's going to be well. There's no asterisk this year, in my opinion. Like if it's the case that now, Killian or Caleb Olson or Dan Jones are the favorites for the win, like it's well deserved. There's no asterisk.
Definitely not. I do think that Killian and Jim hold different weight in the sport, and that comes from years of experience, years of dominance, and like the type of dominance that they've had. Seeing Jim or Killian on a starting list, I think for a lot of runners is all right, what am I going to do to compete for second place? How am I going to be in the mix to maybe be in contention or contact with Jim or Killian, come this point in the race? And they've just shown such extraordinary talent that I do think either one of those guys is a bit of like a mental, maybe a different mental beast than other runners on the start list. I also want to share this anecdote. On Sunday night, a friend at a potluck was like, Jeff, I want to ask you some questions. What's this Western States? Who's this David Roche? I've just been getting fed these videos online, and what this guy's doing is crazy. And this is like super fit, guy in the Valley here, runs and bikes a bunch, but never really tuned into Western States. And he was like, I'm just so excited to watch this race. And it was clear, I think he read an Outside article that was talking about David's ambitions at Western States. So even without Jim and Hayden, I do think that the exposure level, that anecdote, that doesn't happen in my world a lot, where people seek me out to ask about the niche thing that I'm specifically involved in, and go into detail of what is he doing with his heat training? What is he doing with and get specifics. So I anticipate we're going to have a bigger live stream audience than ever before because of the way that David has amplified this storyline just through his own channels.
It is very interesting when you hear the Coffee Club podcast, those guys from the OAC team, when they talk about ultra running, when you hear the Tin Man elite guys talk about ultra running, when you say ultra running in their spheres, the name association is now David Roche. It's fascinating how he has become the conduit between our sport and other disciplines of running. He made an appearance on Coffee Club. Joey Barriatua, who's ex Tin Man, we just had him on the podcast a few days ago. He knows so much about David that he even understands sort of the licorice nature of his relationship to our community. It's you either love him or there's something about his content that turns you off. They're that steeped in it. It's fascinating. I think at one point it was Jim. Jim made all those appearances on Sidious, and maybe before that it was Killian. But kudos to David. It's amazing how far his reach has gone. It's a great point, Jeff.
Yeah, I think going back to 2018 trials in Atlanta when Jim was running, and that was maybe peak Jim Walmsley. How fit is a fittest trail runner, and how can they stack up in track and field or marathon distance? That was you're seeing a lot of crossover of all of a sudden every collegiate and high school runner knows the name Jim Walmsley because the pros in the marathon world are talking about him. Maybe this is David Roche's moment in that same way. I'm bummed for the news that, Unbreakable 2, the film, the sequel is officially canned, but totally understand kind of that side of things. I think Jim was kind of critical to that storyline, and to lose a couple of the big players there does change, a foreseen narrative.
Although it's undoubtedly still going to be an incredible story that unfolds no matter what happens.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's inevitably going to be an incredible story, but there's probably other reasons, obviously, where with
Mike,
Hayden coming out of the picture.
Who are your new front runners in the men's field? If you were to put three people on a pedestal, who would they be?
Three people on a pedestal off the top of my head. I mean, Killian is obviously on my pedestal. Dude, Dan Jones, I think, is going to be a very important part of this men's race.
It's interesting. I mean, the last 3 years, 3, 2?
3.
Yeah, right.
What's the question?
Did he run the last 3 years or the last 2 years?
Oh, yeah.
Well, this will be his third. Sorry.
This will be his third. Yeah. The last 2 years, he's very much run from that, third, fourth, fifth position, kind of the chase back and not being in the mix up front. I agree. I think Dan's fitness has elevated to a level where, like, one thing to look for when runners are trying to build that confidence to be the front runner is, are they going in races and leading wire to wire? Mm-hmm. Are they going into smaller races where they're confident? Sure, there might be competition in it, but they're not relaxed. They're not running it as a training race. They're practicing winning. We've seen Dan Jones do that this year. And like, that's a major shift. I think Caleb, that win at Transgran Canaria, like, I don't think it was surprising, but I don't necessarily know if he entered that race being like, today I'm practicing winning. Right. I think he showed up being like, we'll see how fit I am. I've changed my training significantly. I don't know why I'm talking about this. You guys literally train with a guy, but
I think you're spot on.
I think it's a little different. Yeah. And Dan has shown that he has the, like, I want to be the winner confidence.
Yeah.
This is I don't know if this is a hot take. Maybe this is actually just a take. I believe that the second most physically talented runner in the men's field, assuming Killian's number one, I believe it's Seth Ruling.
Physically talented? I think I'd buy that.
I believe he's the second most gifted runner in this field. And I would put him on the same pedestal as a lot of those guys. And Peterman.
I was going to say Peterman's hard to argue there, but I think the difference there is experience. And I have a ton of respect for Seth. I think he's incredibly talented. Were this a, kind of 80K, 100K race, like, he'd go way up in my expectations of him.
If it was the Western States 100K, it'd be even better.
Yeah, it could be
in some ways.
But I'm with you. I mean, he's an incredibly talented runner. I think the experience here plays a big part. I'll throw out another take or hot take, whether one or the other. Like, I think this dynamic, if David Rose shows up to the starting line healthy, this dynamic of Jim being out of it helps him maybe more than anyone else. And I think David runs from the front better than most other runners. I think if he can control the race and he can run from the front, mentally he's in it. And we saw that at Javelina. We saw that at Leadville. The races where he gets behind even one person, but if he's not leading, whether there's injury or mental breakdown, like, you see that change. And
do we have a recent example of that, Jeff? Like, from the last
Big Alta, like, there was, ankle gate. But you look at, a lot of the races that he's won, he's kind of controlled and led wire to wire. So if he can get in his rhythm there, like, Jim not being in the race, I think plays to his favor if he's able to be the guy that actually controls the entire dynamic. The thought of him responding to other people's moves, like, in my mind, that's going to be a more challenging dynamic for him to succeed in. Like, there's runners that I think can just, like, literally hold on to whoever's out there and grind all the way. And, like, Peterman and Caleb are certainly in that category.
Whereas David did, I mean, more or less kind of time trialed Leadville and Javelina, right? Like, kind of just off the front.
That's what I mean. I actually think he's metrically incredibly sound, and he's super dialed with all of his systems. And if you're taking a cycling like precision to this sport, he's a great person to look at. But if you're looking at your heart rate and your calorie consumption, carb consumption, hydration levels, and trying to do that math while simultaneously trying to respond to a Killian who's going up dropping a crazy, couple mile gap on you, like, I think that's where there can be system overload. So that's my take on, like, on David specifically. Like, I so much respect for what he does, but I think that's going to be what I'm looking out for come race day.
I have a question actually about something, Jeff, that you said earlier when you talked about kind of when Jim and Killian are on the starting line, a lot of people, maybe most people in the world who are on that starting line with them are thinking of it as more of a race for second. With Jim out, but Killian in, like, I would suspect that people probably are a little bit more intimidated. People in this elite men's field are probably a little bit more intimidated by Jim on the starting line than they are by Killian. But I'm curious if you guys have any insight into that, or if that's a bad take. Namely, just because like Jim obviously has mastered Western States and has become the master of Western States.
Yeah, he wrote his doctorate on it.
Right.
Like it's kind of like, oh, you want to go do Sierra Zinal against Killian? Like, yeah, good luck, man. Like that's a crazy thing to want to, win, but it would be super cool. I think that's some of like the au jus, the sauce that this year's race lost is that like anyone who wanted to beat Jim Walmsley at Western States just lost that opportunity. And like that's beating the king of the game at his home course, right? Donkey
the professor
Kong
of Western.
Yeah, Donkey Kong at Donkey Kong level.
So do you think that the rest of this men's field is slightly less intimidated by Killian than they are by Jim?
I think for this scenario, yeah.
Whether that's rightfully so, I guess we'll find out, right? But.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's how I would be carrying it. And Killian's shown he's got raw speed. I mean, the guy's still winning sub ultras in like an amazing way. I think folks probably saw the 15-minute video that he dropped with Normal about his training for Western States, and the 80K effort that he did earlier this week or last week, kind of hitting like mid sixes gap, running it in 6 hours. Like I actually had up Killian's training effort side by side with David Roche's performance at Quad Rock, because they're very similar. Roche's had a bit more elevation gain, but you look at the profiles of their training runs, and Quad Rock's an awesome stimulus for Western States. It's got like 6 or 7 climbs. They're all pretty significant. It kind of mimics those valleys pretty well. And then you look at Killian's and like kind of same profile. Mm-hmm. I was trying to find like, evidence to say, I think that like a lot of the training that David is doing right now makes sense. 20-ish mile runs with like a bigger, hard effort 5-6 weeks out with that 50-mile effort. There's no way to compare David's Quad Rock, which was a course record, and Killian's 50-mile training run, because the gap was almost a minute difference. In a training run, Killian laid down a ridiculous effort that like I was trying to parse out, like, are these the same? Are they super comparable? Elevation is a factor. Who knows what conditions were like for each of them. David ran a bit more vert, but damn, like that effort by Killian put him, pretty much back at the top of the list in my mind as well. And I'm sure rightfully so. Like a lot of people saw that and were like, oh,
yeah.
So Killian, huh?
One thing that struck me about that video is I'm just really curious. Like, first of all, it's maybe the coolest storyline, at least in this men's field this year, is Killian coming back 15 years later. Like, it's just such a cool storyline, and I gotta say, I want him to win. Like, I want Killian to win this race, I think, because it would be one of the coolest things that's happened in my ultra running lifetime. But one of the things that struck me watching that video is I'm just curious, like, how kind of gradually or not his scientification of his training has come to be, like, compared to 15 years ago when it was just, I'm going to go do like this huge mountain link up with a couple Snickers bars, to the point where, I don't know, seeing that video that he put on YouTube the other day, where every item of his training is in a spreadsheet with electrolytes and water and carbs and heart rate and probably a number of other things, right? Like, I'm curious, like, over the course of, let's say, the last 15 years, like, how has his training changed? Like, how abruptly was that? Or has it been like a gradual? Because I think it's probably safe to assume, like, Killian has been very smart and like on the leading edge of training science and training theory, most likely, right, all along. But curious if he's just been ahead of everybody else like the whole time, or kind of how that trend in his training has come to be.
There is a podcast out there, to your point, Mike. It's called How to Become a Pro Cyclist. And the host talks sort of in a after the fact type way with a lot of athletes about how they've conducted their careers over the years, because he was sort of this like fringe pro, semi-pro cyclist himself. And he does some crossover episodes and did this 3-hour episode with Killian that just came out 2 weeks ago now. And Killian talks exactly about that, sort of his progression over the last 15 years and some of the switches he's had to make in his training, including in this build up for Western States. He talks about it in the video too, how not off the couch, but he can't like overnight pivot from his mountain training to those like intervals you saw him doing on a flat road. Like he's feeling his age. Like he even says, like David says, yeah, I'm 37, you know?
They're both 37, huh?
They're both 37. But it made me think from a longevity standpoint. And if you think about individual sports out there, ultra running, cycling, maybe the example I had was tennis, where maybe Roger Federer or Serena Williams did this, but what is the longest current stretch between victories in those major individual sports at like the biggest events? And if
Tiger did it pretty well too, I think.
Tiger did it well too. Yeah. Because he got was it a Masters victory? Yeah. So like if Killian does it here, would that be one of the longest stretch intervals between victories at a major event, like early 20s, late 30s?
Yeah. I do think our sport has a landscape that is like different enough that it's hard to gauge. I think, you know, UTMB is probably the more accurate example of a race for this purpose, just because it doesn't have the same hoops or restricted field to get into. But it's a cool thought. I mean, I remember 12 years into his career, really, like I think 3 years ago when he won and set the course record at UTMB, being like, did anyone envision in 2010, you know, that like Killian's peak year in the sport would be in 2022 or 2023?
Didn't when it was like UTMB in like 2008 or something the first time?
Yeah. Just like that year he won Sierra Zanella, he won UTMB, he won like all of these absolutely epic races. And it was like the longevity of this guy's career is nuts. But hearing in that training video, like, I'm excited to return to Western States after 15 years. Totally bonkers. Almost as bonkers as looking at his Strava and seeing like these tiny little like weeks and being like, what are those little weeks? And like, oh, each one's 140 miles because his biggest week of the year is over 1,000. And cycling's in there too. But looking at Killian Strava is a total trip.
And Mike, I just pulled up Ultrasign up. Killian won UTMB in 2008. Ran it in 2056 and then won it again. I mean, he's won it multiple times, but his latest one was 2022, ran 1949. So that's 14 years between victories.
Yeah. And 2022 was like the season of Killian. If you look at his results that year, it was nuts. It was like undoubtedly, you know, trail runner of the year status.
That was Hard Rock that year too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. He won Hard Rock 6 weeks earlier.
Like,
yeah. I think
beat Francois.
I think to your point, Mike, I almost called you Leah. I think to your point, Mike,
I accept that.
The like intensity and like, you know, kind of detail oriented recording of his training. I think we know hard examples, like concrete examples of Killian influencing other people's trainings. And I think like Adam Peterman doing the Sentinel Hill climb followed by flat, you know, pickups is a great example of like Killian talking about how this worked really well for him and then other runners replicating it and having excellent results. It's like he's kind of written the playbook in a lot of ways.
I want to talk about the women's field too briefly, but Jeff, you submitted a few sort of like leading questions for us around this segment. And one of them was, if last year's Western theme was high carbs, what is this year? High mileage, hydration, hatred, question mark.
I think there's another H that would fit in there.
I missed hatred. Wasn't there a different H before?
There could be a different H, but I think who knows what people are running on. I asked that about the high mileage and like the, you know, does high mileage lead to success or injury? And like, I do think the answer is yes.
For both.
For both. I don't think it's just me. the mileage that's been being put up this year by the top men and the top women is buku. Like, it is next level. And we always see a couple runners do it, but I'm talking about 10 or 12 runners deep pushing 140-mile weeks. And like, it's makes me nervous. I think I've like always had Daniel's running formula like in my head since, being in middle school, of like, do the least amount of work you can do to get the maximum benefit, and like get rid of all of the junk miles. And like, I don't know if runners need to be putting up 350Ks in a week or a 48-mile run 3 or 4 weeks out from Western States. Like, in a lot of ways, that makes me nervous about like, how rested are they? Like, this gets back to your, overarching question, Finn. Like, are we at a point where you have to be a full professional in the sport? And like, I'll say right now, working my job, I could not do the weeks that these runners have put up.
Couldn't do that. No way.
You couldn't recover. There would be no time for you to recover.
It would like totally wreck me. And like, when I think of my preparation for Western States, like, I think, a couple runs in the 5-hour range are great. A race stimulus, like a month out, that is going to make me feel both strong, dial in nutrition and hydration practices. But like, more than anything, I'm like focusing on rest. And like, the amount of high mileage weeks we've seen from runners, Fujao and Ryan Montgomery at training camp last week, like the training camps, I think, is pretty well set up. And last year at training camp, Esther, I remember she like added on another 10 miles after our like 30-mile day. And I was like, that is extra. And like, seeing so many runners do that this year makes me think like, it seems like high mileage has caught on as a much bigger trend. And I know that Carmichael Training Systems, I want to clarify CTS from, Corinne Training Systems.
Corinne Training Systems, yeah.
I know CTS like often does prescribe, longer, higher mileage weeks for runners. And we talk a little bit about, like Abby Hall's putting in huge weeks. I don't know who she's coached, but like, looking at the formula that worked for Katie Scheid the last couple of years, like, who's replicating that?
Right.
In
so
general,
like, we've seen it worked for Katie, obviously, very well under CTS. We've also seen people with similar mileage sort of, crumble or burn out or whatever.
Get stress fractures
over the years, right?
Yeah.
Like, do we think that there's a different approach to these 140, 150-mile weeks than maybe what we've seen lead to burnout and injury in the past? Is there something, a special ingredient in there that maybe was missing in previous sort of generations, if you will, of really high mileage that hopefully we're maybe fueling recovery, whatever? Is there some piece that we suspect is happening
probably the
harder way now?
Fueling. I mean, I do believe that this is an accumulative sport, and like, you're accumulating fitness and resilience and just like efficiencies over year and year and year of doing and like practicing long distance running. So it might just be like, I pay close attention to Jeff McGavra's running. He's a teammate of mine, and I'm pacing him. And like, it might be that the last couple of years Jeff's built up, and 120-mile weeks have felt more comfortable. So 130-mile weeks and 140-mile weeks have felt comfortable. And that people are kind of like layering on tier by tier. But I just got hit the last like 2 weeks with like seeing all these, 140-mile week like Stravas, and was just like, what in tarnation?
Those are just the Stravas that aren't dark or dim.
Yeah. And I like it kind of goes back, like, are people doing too much work? Like, can you do less to be better rested to have the same outcome? And I don't approach that from a lazy perspective. I do approach it from balancing life and like being a good husband and friend and coworker perspective. But like, I also want to be a good runner. Like, I'm not sure outside of training for something like Cocodona or Tour de Jean that I would ever put up a 140-mile week.
I wish we had Brett here for this, but I was wondering if we were to pin the issue on one thing? Is it more the footwear or is it the high mileage? Because I think a lot of these people that are falling before the race, you look at some of these Hoka athletes, like, is there anything about that Tecton X3? And like, I don't know how often, for example, they're wearing a carbon plated shoe in training versus, one of those like super trainers, or even just like the Stinson, like a recovery shoe for a lot of their miles. But like, how much of an indictment against carbon plated shoes could this be?
Be a good question for Brett.
I wish Brett was here for that.
I know he's a fan of that shoe.
By the way, is this the first long on archives without Brett?
It is. Hopefully the last. We miss him.
We gotta pour out a Yingling and a Croy. I can't actually do it. There you go.
We miss you, Brett.
Yeah.
Dang.
I think another thing that jumped out of Killian's video was somewhere in there he was talking about recording the amount of sodium he was taking for like his kind of heat training bike ride, and he was like, I'm taking 3 grams of sodium, which is just like so ridiculous. I understand that it's heat training and he's going to be on the bike for a long time, but I've currently been exploring like the world of hydration and trying to understand hydration rate and like electrolyte levels, and it is something that I think is key. Like hearing Killian say he's going to lose 3 kilograms of weight during that training session, like that's water weight, like that needs to be replaced. And just the baseline, like go weigh yourself before a run, go on a run, weigh yourself after the run, account for whatever ins and outs you had during the run. But like that weight loss or difference is like, that's all water loss. So I do think hydration has been elevated. First really hearing about it during Canyons last year with Rod, with his extra bottles and his vest, when other people are just running with like a single bottle and a belt. So something I'm interested in seeing that pan out on race day, just like how many bottles are folks going to have out there? Like what's this, is this going to change what racing looks like?
We're going to see fewer belts and more vests
versus handhelds versus belts. But I don't know. Have you guys been shook by some of these high mileage weeks? It's like, maybe not.
Does it feel like, I mean, I don't Strava stalk or whatever. Like I don't follow maybe as many people on Strava as like Leah does, and maybe some of you guys do. I mean, I feel like every year we're seeing more and more of these like really high volume, like 120, 130, 140 mile weeks. Does it feel like this year is like sort of a sharper increase in the number of people putting up that mileage?
I don't know the answer to that, but one of the reasons why I think people are doing it is simply because you don't know your limit until you've actually hit it. And I'm sure there are a number of pro athletes out there who, as you're looking to stay on that edge, stay on that frontier, and I'm sure, Jeff, you think about this all the time, although you may know your limit, I don't know. They're like, there obviously is still some fitness gain and there's still some absorption that I can do. I don't know quite what it is. Let's keep experimenting.
I think that's why I love the runners who have success with lower mileage, is because the same can be said for that lower limit. And that's like what that Daniel's running formula quote is trying to like flip on its head.
It's Tom Evans school too. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, you also have a lower limit, and like that one's a harder one to judge because you don't break. The upper limit, like Jared Hazen, amazing runner, classic example. Like he was the guy putting up 140 mile weeks going into Western States, and like it worked for him twice and it didn't work for him every other time. And like, that's that upper threshold is easier to break. It's harder to recognize that lower threshold of, am I doing everything in my power, like, and doing things really well so that there isn't excess, so that I can be more rested and recovered, so that I can, remember to smell the flowers and have like the little joys in life. So when I show up on race day, like I can be 100% confident in the preparation I took, but also be better rested and have a better like mental clarity going into the race. That's kind of like what makes me nervous about seeing so many high mileage weeks. But yeah, I do think last year, a lot of carbon plates and carbs, seeing more high mileage and hydration this year.
On the women's side, I just the one thing I want, well, many things, but one thing I want to make sure I got in. I think there are 7 or 8 women in this women's field that believe they can run sub 16 this year and will try to run sub 16.
As there should
I don't think it's just Fu Zhao.
I agree.
And I do think we're on course record watch too.
I definitely think we're on course record watch, which is super cool. I think in that, like, right, I think we might be on course record watch on men's race and women's race, but I think the women's race maybe has more, could be full of more surprises. I think, like, in terms of cementing yourself at the kind of like top name at Western States and breaking a Courtney Dauwalter record, like, yeah, that's probably pretty even with winning and breaking a gym course record. But if Katie is, you know, to Courtney as Killian is to Jim, then in the women's race, neither of those runners are there. There's opportunity for, you know, more upward mobility.
Yeah, I agree with the women's field this year. Like, there's none of that. Like, we don't have the basically the Katie or the Courtney star power that, like you said, Jim and Killian sort of were bringing that star power to the men's race. We don't have that, like, sharp star power of Katie and Courtney, but I truly believe there are, I mean, probably somewhere at least like 6 to 10 athletes in this women's field who we very well may see put up or have the potential to put up like a Courtney or Katie level performance, if not better than anything we've seen at Western States before. I definitely think that's the case, and I think that makes the women's race particularly exciting because it's sort of an opportunity for, you know, there's already a bunch of stars, but for potentially another superstar to be born.
I'm thinking Fu Zhao, Marianne, Emily Hawgood, Caitlin Fielder, Tara, I think Lin Chen, Esther. Like, off the top of my head, those 7 or 8, I feel like are planning to try to run sub 16. I have no data to back that up, but like just based on how they've raced this in the past, adjusting to whatever is sort of state of the art.
I was looking at something kind of fun earlier today so Riley and Tara
and Riley too, sorry,
Black Canyon this year, and their times were 8:16 and 8:25, I think. Those are right in line with some Black Canyon times of some men who have run sub 16 at Western States. Like, I think that's like 2 data points right there that at least 2 of the athletes in this women's race are I think capable of going at least sub 16. I also noticed that Rod last year ran, I wrote this down, Rod ran 8:19 at Black Canyon last year. Like, Riley ran 8:16, Tara ran 8:25, and we know what
that's
Rod
a great point.
You know what I mean? Like, I know that's not like necessarily if this then that, obviously, but like it's an argument that kind of shows me we should definitely be on that sub 16 and course record watch.
That's a great point.
I think the women's race is going to need, similarly, like someone who wants to push it earlier. One thing that Katie and Courtney did in the last 2 years was run incredibly fast second halves of the race, which works if you are a lone runner. Courtney separated herself pretty well in 2023. Katie separated herself quite well in 2024. I think for more women to all land sub 16, there needs to be someone willing to push the pace early and a pack that's willing to like respond to that. And I'm not saying, you know, crazy fast times through Robinson Flats, but, you know, setting yourself up to be in sub 16 position at Robinson Flat without, you know, some type of heroic last 30 miles. Because Katie and Courtney, like the last 2 years, they absolutely crushed it in the last 30 miles. And that's not an easy thing to knock out of the park. I think we also have some other incredibly fast ladies who aren't necessarily proven at this distance, looking at Shea Aquilano, looking at Fiona Pascal, who are bringing incredible talent that, like, that naivety can work in your favor in an exciting way. So
Shea has at least...
She has 100 experience. Sorry,
yeah.
She just was a ticket entrance.
Right.
Yeah. but Fiona stepping up. Yeah. So I'm with you. I look at the women's list, and I think even adding to your names, Brett, I think Hannah Allgood can run sub 16 hours. I think Abby Hall on a good day can run sub 16 hours.
Abby Hall
I think
is coming for us, dude.
Yeah, Abby Hall just put up a crazy week last week.
She was one of the, yeah.
42 miles. I saw that. It was a wild run.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how the more tenured Western States runners, Esther, Emily, Keely, how they respond to the race early on. And if they choose to kind of set the standard and the pace, or if a race gets away because it hasn't panned out how it has the last, 3 or 4 times they've run Western States.
I have to think another one is, I don't know if we've mentioned Marianne yet, but I have to think Marianne wants to win Western States.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. Is fully able
and believes that she can.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Lin Chen not racing in Australia, not racing that 100 2 weeks ago is a major, I think it's a good thing for her chances come Western States, because Lynn's another runner who is just knocking on the door.
And she was in the mix last year, by the way. I think she was in third, maybe fourth.
She was in third at the river.
And her heel was essentially completely detached from the rest of her foot with a massive blister that she could not go on physically. But even with that, that's what she looked like when she got to the river, and she was still had her in podium position or contention. If she shows up again, she's, I'm sure, thinking that she can be potentially winning this race.
Marianne might be the best racer in this field, because in just looking at her Strava, for example, she just gets it done. She rises to the occasion and just is so good at just getting the most out of herself. And even podiuming on injury, literally hobbling to the finish at UTMB and getting second or third a few years ago. So,
Marianne has a lot of podium finishes, but not a lot of wins. And I kind of think of that similarly to Emily Hawgood coming back to Western States, a lot of top 10, top 5 finishes, but hasn't got that win yet. I think there's going to be so many people like that who are hopefully really hungry for a win at Western States, knowing that they can, believing that they can. Because I know it. I mean, I know it could be any number of these women.
Yeah, I don't think it's a great strategy to go into a race and tee off of a runner and be I'm going to run what that runner runs. But Emily Hawgood's a pretty damn good bet to tee off of. Maybe the best, most consistent in either field. Hey, I want to be in the mix for a win. I'm going to tee off of Emily and follow what she does. And I think we saw a little bit of that same, desire to be the winner and the marquee player in the race from Emily earlier this year, really going out and trying to race competitively to be first, not to be fighting for first. So I think from now until the race, the hay's in the barn, right? We're maybe doing some fine tuning heat training, maybe you'll definitely doing heat training and maybe some downhill stimulus, but ideally folks are just resting and getting all of their logistics squared away. So interesting to see who shows up with that kind of swagger and confidence come race day.
There are obviously a number of names who will be in hot contention for the win and for the podium, and certainly for the top 10 that we haven't mentioned here. But I know obviously this is not a Western States preview episode necessarily. One more sort of point I want to make, though, is I think at least the last 2 years at Western States in the women's field, we've seen a significant improvement in the top 10, in the F10 time, right? Do you think that F10 time, that F3 time, do you think those are going to continue to get faster with this field this year? And again, this is what conditions are a huge factor at Western States.
For sure.
Yeah.
But it's happened regardless of conditions the last couple of years.
That's the crazy part.
Yeah.
I think
and if we're to believe, Mike, your insights about sort of the Black Canyon 100K comparison, maybe I have been setting the bar too low, thinking about sub 16. I think that's a really interesting thing to think about. It's is this field ready to have a pretty stratospheric jump in times?
Do you think what's more likely, sub 16 in this women's race or sub 14 in the men's race?
Sub 16,
Yeah,
my
sub 16,
opinion.
I would say.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Although I think both are probably likely, maybe regardless of, not withstanding any extreme conditions.
Either that or all of this like hydration and nutrition testing is going to just like blow up and people are going to be pooping themselves
Everybody's
and
just gonna have
vomiting,
diarrhea
and just like brutal thing to watch. But
Okay.
yeah,
Before we move on, we had, and I can take this one. We had an overwhelming number of comments of us wanting to talk about Unbreakable 2. I'll just say overhead that I'm sad it's not happening, because I think before anything else, I'm a fan, and I was kind of frothing at the mouth to consume that content. Like, it just, to create another historical piece as a companion to the first one is incredible. And I think I salute Baseline, anyone that's in the arena trying to make something happen. So I think that you deserve to like applaud that. I think the only other thing that I wanted to say here is like, I'm similarly in the trenches. Like, we've tried to make films in the past. We've made films in the past. We'll try to make stuff in the future. And this easily could have been us, like I have a lot of empathy, because we could have put out some promo for something and stuff out of our control backfired. And then we're responsible to answer to it. Right. So like, same thing with the Black Canyon stuff with race directing. Like, I kept thinking to myself, wow, like with Twisted Fork, if this happened there, how would we respond to it? Maybe not as well as Aravaipa. Like, maybe we would have really fumbled the bag and further messed things up. So I followed this Unbreakable stuff closely, kind of to take lessons. And I think the lesson I take from it is, don't announce stuff until you have it. Like, until you have it all in the bag, don't announce it, because there's just too many risk factors there, And
I was so hoping you were going to say this.
Well, I say it, it's really a lesson for myself. It's like, when we make stuff in the future, we cannot announce it till we have it, because it's so precarious. And like, I was listening to Rest Day today, great episode, Dylan and Corinne, and they talk about Unbreakable 2 and sort of the postmortem there. And they immediately go into, and oh, by the way, we're going to tease out this women's field movie about Western States, which by the way is awesome. But I'm like, don't announce it till you have it.
Finn, question for you as a media person. How is that any different from an athlete announcing their race schedule or not announcing their race schedule at the beginning of the year? I mean, like, put yourself in like the racer's shoes of like, is this what my goals are for the year? Like, should you expect, Jim at Western States? Like, what if it doesn't happen? And like, there's just a general expectation that runners announce their race schedules, and people are like, I want to know what so-and-so is racing. But it's got to be a pretty relatable and similar feeling of like, if I'm not 100% sure, like I was in anguish last spring going back and forth on like, can I run Western States? Is this hamstring injury like borderline? They tell me I'm not hurt. I'm in pain. What the heck's going on? Like, I felt like anything I put out going into Western States was going to jinx me or like be bad juju for my ability to actually show up and like race well. And so I think you end up in this like kind of zone of paralysis of like, well, if everything's just going to go well and work out, sure, it's easy to announce a project or it's easy to announce a race. Maybe races are a little different because it's public information. An FKT effort is actually probably like a more comparable thing. Like, hey, I really want to do this. But announcing it like can be scary.
This is a great thought experiment. And I will be the first to admit that when the Unbreakable 2 announcement came out, the last thing that I was thinking about was that anything would possibly go wrong and they would have to cancel it. Like, my first thought was, yes, it's happening. Great. We have another thing to look forward to. We're going to memorialize this historical thing. Thank you, Journey Film. Thank you, Free Trail. Like, huge salute. So I was not thinking about negative externalities, stuff like that.
My first thought when I saw it was, wow, that's a long time before the start line for people to dig themselves into a hole, for life to happen, whatever that is. Like, we're still a month out from Western States.
Was the first Unbreakable announced beforehand?
No, it was after. They collected the footage and then like a year or two later put it out. But there also wasn't the same type of news cycle that existed back then, Yeah.
But I say that to say like, there's still, potential top 10 runners that between now and the start line might end up dropping or withdrawing from Western States. And like, that's just the reality. The hardest part about this race is getting to the start line healthy.
Jeff, and maybe Mike, I'll ask you this. To Jeff's point, do you think it's fair to put media and athletes on the same pedestal in terms of going public beforehand about whatever projects they're doing?
I love the way that you spun that back and yeah, pose that question, Jeff. I think Finn's just asking me because he doesn't know the answer himself or how he feels about it. So he's
the reality is
we're cutting that out.
If you don't announce it and it's a surprise, that's awesome. You know?
Yeah.
And like, I think I'm not going to shame anyone on not announcing like, hey, my goal is to like summit Everest or something. And, you know, like to go to Tyler Andrews, like Tyler Andrews built up a ton of, you know, media and hype around like, he's going to go for the FKT on Everest. And he tried 3 times and it didn't come together for him. I'm certain that he's capable of doing that, but like, that's a lot to know that you might be facing like that type of failure in advance and being willing to announce it and live with that.
Maybe the difference is, and you're right, it is, I think it does, maybe it is a little bit more similar to an FKT type attempt like that than a race, but maybe the difference between like media announcing a project and an athlete announcing a race schedule is like fans of the athlete know that athlete is going to be running a certain number of races in a given year. They like know that there is a schedule to be announced. Nobody is necessarily expecting like, you know, Free Trail or Journey Films, whatever, to create an Unbreakable 2 film. So it's not like they're meeting an expectation by announcing this film. It's a totally like self-created, like this, it's its own entity. It's not like, you know, we put out a film every year or about Western States every year. So now we're announcing, yeah, we're going to do another one on Western States this year. It's a completely like, you know, self-created, like new hype, new thing to be excited about. So maybe that's like a small nuanced difference between the media.
I'm sure
and
there's
the
differences.
But
yeah, I was just throwing it back for
no, I think it's a really fair question.
Mike, thanks for buying me time so I have a good answer too.
You're welcome. That's really all I was trying to do. But it happens. Like it does happen. Like, I don't know. I think about it as a photographer. You know, there are times where my work depends on an athlete's starting a given race and hopefully finishing a given race. But almost every time I work with a brand as a photographer, like we have a contingency or we have a plan in place. You know, like, okay, if I'm following 3 athletes and one of them drops at Robinson Flat and the other 2 go on, like, this is what you'll get by the end of the day, you know. So we kind of like try to lace in those contingencies or possibilities beforehand. Or there is the case where like if a brand invests in me to be their photographer for an event and then the athlete doesn't start or doesn't finish the event, like the contract is still signed, you know, like they still have to chalk up that investment, that money to me, which is the worst case, I think, because I want it to happen and I still get paid, you know, in that case, but I want to see the athlete as a fan also like still run the race. So that's like another sort of related example of like, yeah, a brand investment, but that may or may not pan out depending on an athlete's schedule. But go ahead, Finn.
I'm super conflicted here because on the one hand, I am, and to use a bolder phrase, I am super pro spraying. Like whether it's an athlete or media, like if you're excited about something and you want to start building hype for it, spray as much as you want, you know. And I know that I just lost all of Boulder, Colorado there, but like spray as much as you want. Like, I love it. Give us something to talk about. Let's hash it out. I think it's a little bit different for the media because yes, there is your own project on the line, but you are involving external people. And like one thing that we've thought about in the last few months, especially post Barkley and working on this Jasmine film, is like, if we had gone to Jasmine with this film idea before this last Barkley, how would that have impacted her performance, if at all? Like, would any knowledge of documentation have had any negative or positive impact on what she was doing? But like, really concerned about the negative piece of it. And I think all I can say for us is the way that we're moving forward on the filmmaking side of things is we will go to events and we will capture footage and we will follow athletes without much structure. And then maybe we'll do that over a fairly long time horizon, multiple races. And then we'll look at what we have. And if we think we have something, we'll go to a race or an athlete or a brand or whatever, and we'll put the remaining pieces together. And maybe we have a finished product that is a story. But we're not going to any specific race or going to any specific athlete with this like foregone expectation that there is definitely a story here. We're going to document it at all costs, etc.
Yeah. Looking at the chase poster in your background, just like thinking like retrospectively, we can now look back on that and say like, that was a kind of miracle that all came together so well.
Exactly.
And you know,
that was my favorite thing about, like, one of my favorite things about the chase. And I talked with Dylan Harris about this after the screening in Salt Lake, that I just thought it was incredible how well they wove the Harry Schubertus storyline into that, because Harry was not the Harry who won Cocodona 250 last year, was not part of the initial cast that the film crew was focusing on when they showed up, like in the build to Cocodona last year and during the race last year. And they still got some footage. They drew from the live stream a little bit, and then they did some interviews with him after the race, and they incorporated his storyline into the film still in a really, really engaging and effective way. And that makes me think that, you know, like I'm sure there are reasons and valid reasons for the Unbreakable 2 project not coming to fruition here. But it makes me wonder if like a better way to go is like, we can almost guarantee, we were talking about this earlier, we can almost guarantee that Western states every year, men's race, women's race, the whole event, golden hour, whatever, is going to be like filled with incredible stories. And it makes me wonder if it's like more worth maybe focusing more on the stories of races than of specific people before the races.
Sometimes I think there's magic in, like, to your point about the unexpected becoming such a focal point in the film. I know, for example, again, just to riff more on the free trail thing, like they were at Cocodona filming Courtney, and obviously things went haywire, but a part of me thinks they now have a massive opportunity in their lap because they were able to document an extremely rare occasion where the greatest athlete in the history of our sport had to grapple with failure. And I don't know if their hands are tied, if they could only tell one type of story. I guess it would also come down to like the extent to which Courtney would want to participate in hashing the rest of that out. But in my opinion, they likely have a gold mine film that's not only great for their brand, but like important for fans of the sport, runners in the sport to see. Like, how does someone like Courtney, who is virtually unbeatable and has had overwhelming levels of success, like this rare occasion where she fumbled, like I would love to see how that all happened and now how she's currently processing it. And they have all the footage to document that.
I love that. That's a great point.
Wait, before we move on, I had a big smile in the middle of that, not because Courtney had any sense of failure. Like, that was hard to watch, and the race ended up going in an amazing direction as it was. Rachel ran an all-time performance, but I was thinking, like, in that moment as a director, what would have happened if it's like, hey, Rachel's out, let's actually continue following Rachel, or Courtney's out, let's continue following Rachel here and like see what story there might be able to tell, like, in that. And that made me think of Werner Herzog's Into the Inferno. And this is a slight tangent, but
please, no.
Werner Herzog, amazing documentarian, made this documentary called Into the Inferno. It's about volcanoes. We like volcanoes. They're fun, super cool. In it, he gets permission to go to North Korea, which is a culture. This is my second episode in a row I'm bringing up North Korea. Balloons.
And now you get balloons for North Korea. All right, Jeff.
He gets permission to go to North Korea, where their culture has a huge reverence for this one volcano. And he gets into North Korea and he's like, just openly breaks down the fourth wall. And he's like, this is not a film about volcanoes anymore. This is crazy. This is now a film about documenting culture in North Korea. And I've never like had that happen where I'm just watching like something. I study geology. I like volcanoes, where like 90-degree turn just fully documenting culture in North Korea because this documentarian got permission to go behind the curtain, and it's nuts. Totally recommend checking it out. But yeah, like what would that be like? Like, hey, we're actually making a film, hopefully on Courtney winning Cocodona. Courtney's out at mile 108. We're now telling the story of Rachel Entrekin, who is like a superstar on the rise in the sport, and this could be the first moments we're capturing her ascendancy.
Was this the best thing that you found on the internet this week, Into the Inferno? This is great.
I haven't watched this film in like since it came out, probably in like 10 years, but it's super
It's good.
It's crazy.
Okay. This is a brief topic, but Des Linden was at Western States training camp this past weekend. She is going to be pacing Joe McConaughey from Forest Hill to the river. And one of the listener questions that was submitted for this episode was, if you were Des, what would your next couple of years in trail look like as you sort of, integrate into this world?
Natural transition.
Yeah.
I mean, JFK this upcoming fall, win JFK next year. Javelin. I mean, I think she's doing Tunnel Hill, but if I were her, I would do JFK. Are they too close to each other?
It'd be one or the other.
I think for trail running, like for trail, like that gives you a little bit more of a taste of it. I would love to see Des, like, it sounds like Tunnel Hill's happening. I'd rather see JFK, Javelina, Western States.
Would you rather see a JFK course record than like a 50-mile world record in this November from Des? Assuming those are both.
I think one's a trail race and one is, in my opinion, not a trail race. It's like
dipping your toes into trails, though.
But a pretty important dip.
No, I know.
You know, 14, 16 miles on the AT.
Like a good 12 miles of true, like, reasonably technical trail, like definitely representative of the larger trail ultra scene.
But I think it would be super cool to see Des hit a 100-miler. Like, I think Javelina would be a great one. And like that still doesn't necessarily prepare you for the technicality or the descents and climbs at Western States. So there's probably another key tune-up race somewhere in there. But yeah, it would be very cool.
One way I actually had a question at the end of our Unbreakable 2 conversation that would segue to this is, like, is there somebody out there thinking, or maybe this is happening, like, did somebody start making the Des film at training camp this past week? You know what I mean? Like, is somebody going to be looking at this as one of those other storylines that's film worthy? And will they decide, or will the sponsors of that film decide that it's film worthy as it unfolds and continue to think so as it unfolds, no matter what? Because it should, like, again, in our minds, this should be a very interesting storyline to follow for the next couple of years, kind of regardless of how it plays out, right?
That's a great point. Well, Mountain Outpost was there, so they would probably be best positioned to begin that process. That's a great question.
Or maybe Brooks was, I don't know if Brooks might be working on something. I don't know at all. But.
I know.
I was just trying to think. Billy Yang did an independent documentary on Magda before Life in a Day, I think. Maybe it was shorter. Like, I guess, because Magda, in my mind, is like kind of the last, world level marathoner turned trail runner example we have. Like, was that documented? Can you learn anything from that with Des's kind of switch into trail?
This is super inside baseball, but and I'm just using this because it's top of mind example. When we were making the Jasmine Paris film, one of our biggest unexpected expenses was having to reach out to other filmmakers and media outlets for archival footage. And it ended up being pretty expensive. Like, we had to get all this third-party footage. So going back to my point about just shooting for the sake of shooting and trying to position yourself around possible historical moments, I think one of the big things that like a Mountain Outpost could do for the future is just be there and be like an archival source and just always be ready. And then when you're making like a 30 for 30 film on the history of the 2020s decade of ultra running, like, they got everything they need.
That's such a good point, because how it's so likely that in the event that, let's say, sometime in the next couple of years, Des wins Western States or, makes a huge historical splash in the ultra running scene, somebody is likely to want to make a film about that, and somebody's going to want to have some footage from her first trail camp at Memorial Day training camp in 2025.
Dude, it was like
that's a great
25.
point.
It was like 25% of our budget, and Jules and I were like, "Oh my god, there's a business here."
There you go.
Finn, have you been to training camp before?
Yeah, I went in 2018. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Yeah, I was gonna say,
Dude,
I know
Monsters of Massage. The best thing about training camp is Monsters of Massage. I got a great massage every day post run.
Did you know
So
Finn
good.
will, Jeff? I don't know how you feel about this, but it surprised me to learn that Finn will get massages like right after races. Like in his Cocodona build, he ran. Why do I have a thought bubble on my screen?
I think because you did a thumbs up.
Oh,
Sometimes it reacts.
Finn did Buffalo Run 50 this spring, 50 mile in his build for Cocodona, and he got a massage that evening. Like, right, Finn? Didn't you get a massage later that evening after running 50 mile?
I believe in doing it about 12 hours after the activity.
I think it totally depends if I'm training through or if I'm actually resting afterwards.
Cyclists do it on the tour. Cyclists do it on the tour every night after a stage.
Yeah. Western states, if I'm like taking a full recovery, I'll get a massage like 5 days later.
Yeah.
If I'm training through a race, I'll get a massage like pretty soon thereafter. If massages are offered at the finish, I'll totally get like a flush out to get some of that.
I guess that like flush out finish line massage though is different for me than like going in for like a 60, 90 minute like deep tissue, which is what
I just can't believe you can logistically pull that off. And I guess that race was in Salt Lake and you live in Salt Lake. So
it was in Salt
Lake.
That
worked out.
Yeah. It was like
that
30
seems
minutes
like it
home.
would be challenging.
Anyway, sorry to get us off track.
Yeah, no, I love good massage convo. Training camp, Des. What did you have any other thoughts on that, Mike? And like what races you'd like to see Des show up at?
Comrades.
I mean, we want to see her go to the trails though, right? Like I think we're all curious, like
with the ramp, just like a gradual ramp, just to make sure it's like she has some
UTMB 2026, nothing beforehand. Yeah.
Get her some
just
stones.
Go right up. Like is anyone going to document anything, Dan Green or Harry Subertis this year? Like doing the Cocodona Western States double? Like Dan, I think he's at this point not an odds are like favorite, but he's still got some odds. Like
for sure.
Dan has a lot of talent and he's certainly coming off of what one might call momentum. It could be worth having a camera on Dan a little bit because,
I won't be surprised at all if he's at least top 10. Like, I think if it's,
I would be shocked. I would actually be shocked if he was top 10, not because I think he's fully talented enough. I just I cannot fathom.
I just wonder if it's going to feel like a sprint, and he's just got this massive strength from Cocodona and Cocodona training. Clearly
his build is definitely, this would be the high mileage example we're all looking for.
And I heard that he's back up to pretty high mileage. Like it sounds
over
like
120 or so.
Okay. Yeah. So like, it sounds like he's recovered and healthy. That tells me that he has a very deep reservoir of strength on top of what we know is already a really, he's got some good speed.
Yeah. He ran a great Javelina.
Sub 13, I think at Javelina, right? Like, so
I say shocked. Like I want to be shocked. I want Dan Green in the top 10 fully. But it would be crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on. I want to talk, I think for the first time ever on this podcast, about Bear Performance Nutrition. They had a Backyard Ultra last weekend. There's a lot to talk about, positive, negative. There was one funny thing. Their tagline is "Go one more." And it's all about, persevering when you're in the weight room, like get that extra rep. If you're out there, run that extra mile. And I do think there is some comedy in the fact that a brand that has based its vision on go one more had to stop this race due to weather. So the runners were physically not allowed to go one more. I thought that will never not be funny.
Go one left.
Go one left.
Go no more.
You're all set.
Go no more.
Yeah.
Go no more. But I also think it's interesting that there's like almost these parallel universes that exist in like the endurance sports running worlds, because until a few weeks ago when it was brought up in our group chat, I don't think either of you guys even knew who Nick Bear was or BPN.
You interviewed him before Western States last year during the week leading up to Western States last year, and I took photos of him for that interview for you, and I didn't know who he was at the time. And I still, basically a couple weeks ago, I think I associated that memory with the initials BPN, but I never like actually gained any knowledge of the brand or the product when that happened. So,
I didn't actually realize you had interviewed him, Finn. No, I still don't know who Nick Bear is. And like outside of seeing Max Joliffe like post some content from the BPN Athlete Summit, maybe a month ago, I didn't know that they're in like the trail running or ultra running space. And I think there was like some hints at BPN in the Cocodona live stream, but like outside of that exposure, I'd never heard of Go One More. The most exposure I've gotten to it was reading like a Canadian running article on it becoming incredibly popular or getting a ton of viewership.
Was this the first year of Go One More?
I think it's the fifth.
Oh. And is it, where did it?
Of the Ultra? I think last year was the first year of the Backyard Ultra.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So this was the second. And then where did it take place that it got rained out?
It was on I think they call it like the Bear Ranch. So Nick Bear, it's his property. I think he owns it. They literally have a ranch on the property, and from social media, it looked like an open field. And yeah, that was the 4 mile course.
Where at that? And what was the weather?
Somewhere, I want to say it's somewhere on the outskirts of Austin, Texas. Yeah.
Okay.
Crazy weather comes through, but I mean, to me, a couple of things interesting. One, just like the fact that there's this, from a engagement standpoint, an ultra event in our world taking place that rivals Cocodona and Western States in terms of reach on social media.
But it didn't reach me.
Exactly. Well, that's what I'm saying.
It did reach me, but it reached me because they posted a Border Patrol badge, like in a photo about the race announcement, which just seemed pretty like tasteless and tone deaf. And like, I'm not against learning more about like BPN or that community, but doesn't seem like an attitude that I'm, in alignment with. I think inclusivity and trying to create safe spaces for runners is a more important thing than like trying to kind of like find allegiance amongst maybe like political views of your followers. So that was again, did not encourage me to like tune in to Go One More, but retrospectively I saw the Canadian running article about it.
That was an open question for me. It's like, because again, this was probably one of the negative pieces of this whole topic is like, when you look at that photo, maybe we link to it in the show notes, maybe we don't, but was that a dog whistle for their political views, or did it have something to do with, for example, Nick's allegiance to people who work, inside that unit of the government?
Do you have affiliation with?
Well, he's got a military background, like he was in the Army, and I'm just assuming here. I wonder if he has any people who he served with that then went to Border Patrol after that. But like, I think it's an open question, right? It's like in this era of social media and brand building. I mean, we've seen it in like actual politics before, where like you'll have statements like states' rights, or whatever, and that actually means like segregation. You look at a photo like that Border Patrol thing. Is it actually a vote for like, conduct these like inhumane actions around moving migrants from the country, immigrants, stuff like that?
I think only saw this because maybe it was you, Jeff, that shared it in our group chat. So again, like this content did not reach me, whatever algorithms or whatever, like they didn't find me with any of this BPN Go One More stuff. But my reaction to that is like, yeah, you don't include a Border Patrol patch in a photo like that accidentally. Like there's a reason you do that. And the only reason that I could think of, again, maybe there's somebody out there that could prove me wrong, but like the only reason I could think of to deliberately include that in the photo that has nothing to do, it was about running, right? Or the supplements or something. It wasn't anything about politics or the border. So the only reason to include that is to like funnel some people's interest, right? Like to indicate like a dog whistle, if like you said, Finn, like if anything, it's not to show like, hey, this is a place for everybody. It's like that dog whistle kind of symbol, like, oh yeah, there's a certain sort of ideology or part of the population that we're here and we're interested in connecting with.
Right.
And that seems pointless and counterproductive to me, both as a member of society and as like a brand. I'm not sure why a brand would want to do that.
Yeah, I think it comes off as divisive to me. And like, if your like goal is to sell more protein powder or whatever supplements you make, like, gaining traction to the larger ultra running community and trail running community would probably be beneficial. But something like that is going to be, I think, a pretty immediate turnoff. And like I think brand tone, it's an interesting thing to explore, because some brands have to be pretty vanilla. Some brands have to be just like, if there's an kind of like overarching parent company, or, there's a board that you're reporting to, like, you can't necessarily get away with having more punchy copywriting or whatnot. And like with our brand, we see that quite a bit. Like, we own ZipFit and we get to kind of talk about it how we want. And like, it's a longer leash in terms of like, we don't need to stay within these confines of a boardroom or of, investors. I think the way that it divides the trail running community, ultra running community at large is, what I take issue with. I think there's like a really cool opportunity, and it's maybe my greatest takeaway from Cocodona was like, I got exposed to a bunch of runners I'd never heard of. And like, I've been following the sport closely for 10 years. And it's cool to kind of see, Arizona's a classic place for it, but like, see a lot of, differing people from different walks of life, like, come together over the love of a sport. So I do think I look for unity within the trail community and like ultra community. That doesn't mean there can't be differing like opinions and beliefs, but I think putting it front and center on social media is certainly alienating to a part of that community.
I'd be curious to know if you guys think this is beneficial. And I'll say a couple things before. Well, one, I think this is an important conversation because just looking at the numbers, this event drove over 30 million impressions on Instagram, and the BPN account added 50,000 followers in 3 days. So they're certainly making a mark in the community, and it looks like they're going to be a mainstay. So like, it's sort of like, how do you grapple with that? How do you incorporate? How do you have this sort of melting pot take place where everyone's welcome, stuff like that? We've had Nick on the pod before, like you said, Mike. He came through our Western States studio last June because he was pacing Sally McRae at Western. I found him to be a great guy. I really enjoyed him. We didn't get into his political views. That never really came to the surface in our conversation. However, his publicist actually just reached out because he has a book called Go One More, and I think he's on sort of the book tour circuit. And I don't know if you guys think this would be valuable. If it's not, we can talk about it. But if we did have him on the pod again, I think it'd be interesting to address this point. It's like, as you look at your social media reach for this event, can you talk about how you think the audience should interpret this particular photo? What do you think was the intent behind it? And like how that informs, the way you think about brand building in your audience? Just an idea.
I think that would be super interesting. Like, this is a company that bears his name. I hate myself sometimes.
I love that.
So bad.
That was good.
Like, you're putting your name and your face on this. Like, what's that mean to you?
I love hearing from the source. Yeah. Like, cause we're talking about it here. We're interpreting it. Also, didn't somebody say in our chat that the post got taken down?
Oh, it did.
Yeah, I think so.
It got taken down. Okay.
So like, there's more, like there's a reason for that too, right? Like, I don't know. We're just sitting here talking about it. I always love to hear from the source.
That would lead me to believe that they saw a mistake with that post, and someone like Nick would say, we don't want that to represent our brand, or we can see how if there was supposed to be a positive connotation, it could be easily misconstrued as like what you were saying, Jeff.
Yeah.
I'm just guessing.
Like, Mike, you were military. Like, there's like I think there's like, it's broad strokes to be like, oh, well, he's military, so maybe like there's like a strong connection to like border patrol. Like, to Mike's point, like, that is that a reason to put that in a post? And like, yeah, I don't know. It's
that all being said, this just made me think of like, maybe there's a parallel here. I don't know. I know nothing about BPN, unfortunately, for the sake of this conversation, probably, but like, maybe there's a parallel from what I've heard to like Black Rifle Coffee Company. Are you guys familiar with them?
Yeah.
Like a very just like objectively conservative leaning marketing approach and branding strategy for a coffee company that is also very ingrained in the military community and helping, like, sending coffee. I assume they still do this, like sending coffee to deployed troops and things like that. But like a very deliberately conservative marketing and branding strategy from a coffee company. And I think probably because the coffee industry in the US was largely viewed as like a more liberal space and a more liberal sort of population. And so that was almost like a Black Rifle's marketing strategy, from how I understood it over the years, was more of like a, hey, like, we want to show people we like coffee a lot. There's not a lot of people that think like us that really like good coffee a lot. So we want to try to attract those people. Maybe there's a parallel. I don't think we need to get too deep into this, but like maybe there's a parallel there with the ultra running community and BPN.
I mean, you made me think of just like Black Rifle Coffee is like the only veteran owned coffee company that I can name off the top of my head, because like it's front and center. Yeah. And like, I think there's an audience that would look at that logo and be like, do we really need a gun on coffee packaging? And there's some people who look at that logo and they're like, that relates to, you know, a decade of my service. Now.
I'm going to try
And like, that's great. Like I can totally understand that. And I think like,
and in that vein, sorry to cut you off, but like, I think coffee has been a very positive force in my life. Ultra running has been a very positive force in my life. So the more people that can experience that, whether I agree with them ideologically, politically or not, the more people that can experience ultra running, in my mind, is a good thing. Sorry to cut you off, Jeff, but
no, I think you're spot on. I was just going to say, like, I think people seek out veteran-owned businesses, and like, there's a clear marketing, like putting marketing cap on, like a clear reason to position yourself that way. But yeah,
one thing I have a little bit of sympathy for is, like, let's just say that for the longest time, something that you belong to, some organization, or in our case, it could be a sport. For the longest time, it had a positive connotation and it was like a force for good in your life. And then a bunch of events transpire and like a large portion of the public no longer sees it, perhaps rightfully so, as something worth celebrating, but you still want to retain that sense of pride for it. I can see how, like, especially in like a military context, that could be a serious dilemma. And like, you don't want to self-censor your pride for it just because of the current moment and what's happening in the current climate, you know? Just trying to think empathetically about someone, for example, imagine something happened in the ultra running world and we still love our sport and we're going to defend it to the grave, but it's not politically popular to be a fan of ultra running.
I mean, that happened with cycling, right? And doping, right? Yeah. Like, it was not cool to be a popular or like a fan of cycling from 2005 to 2015 or whatnot. So I think that might be an endurance sport parallel. My first thought, like, if there was a thought bubble above my head, it was like, Kanye ? Like, then that's the whole, like, separate the artist from the art, and like, what does all of this mean? But yeah, I think when you're a brand, you have to be a little bit more, I guess, like the opposite of tone deaf, like tuned in.
And like deliberate about who you are addressing and who you want to address, right? If those are different population, which they could be. Yeah.
But yeah, speaking of the government and laws, Finn,
segue.
Do you want like a minute to talk about why you want to cancel the Wilderness Act and defund public lands?
Yeah. So in our last episode, and actually I did not think that this was going to get a ton of traction, but there were some impassioned comments on the YouTube version of this episode, or last episode's conversation. I did sort of say offhand that in this day and age, I could see value in revising some aspects of the Wilderness Act of 1964. And I have a couple thoughts for why. I think the first thing I want to say up front is I do see myself as a pretty stout environmentalist, or at least I aspire to be that. If you open up the hood on my life, not everything would totally align, but I do aspire to that sort of station in life. Some of my favorite authors are environmentalists, people like Gary Snyder, who Jeff, I know you and I both share a mutual love for. Go light, learn the flowers, et cetera, et cetera. I think we're in a really precarious time environmentally in our country where we need to build a stronger wilderness constituency. And we need more people to come around to the value of just like wild places in the outdoors in order to protect it at scale. And I have always thought that one of the best ways to go about that is to find ways to commune and celebrate and participate in wilderness at scale. So like, I think you need, like, part of what makes, I think, our sport so cool is you get 400 people coming together in a really cool place, building community, and maybe more importantly, like reaffirming why they love natural places and why they want that to seep into the rest of their life. And so I think there's a ton of value in amending. First of all, I believe in a living, breathing constitution. I believe in reevaluating laws as times change. And I think that there's a ton of value in separating the Wilderness Act into like, yeah, we don't want like the extractive economy, oil, carbon stuff to be working on these lands, but maybe trail running is different. We don't even have to attach profit to it. But yeah, I think we need to build a wilderness constituency that happens through events. And then I would also challenge like how natural the concept of wilderness is, because before we built all these laws, before the US existed, people lived on these lands for tens of thousands of years. Yeah. Humans. There were humans that lived on these lands for tens of thousands of years. So I would say it's like almost anti-natural to remove humans completely in a communal type way from these places.
And that's like, that goes to the antiquities portion of the Wilderness Act. And I worked as a naturalist in the White Mountains for quite a while. So the Wilderness Act and Antiquities Act like are definitely my safe space, and I enjoy chatting about them. But to your point, Finn, and this like goes through regulation, the Wilderness Act, like value in keeping it, and like the kind of nonsense of it all at the same time. The Antiquities Act protects any human stuff that was in the wilderness prior to 1964 as well. So that's why you're going to see mining camp ruins, leftovers, and like logging camp leftovers in these natural spaces. But I'll call attention to Galehead Hut in the White Mountains in New Hampshire. It's located in the Pemigewasset Wilderness. Because of the Antiquities Act, it was there beforehand. It's kind of like Hard Rock or Western States in that it's grandfathered in. But they had to renovate it in like, I think maybe the 90s or early 2000s. And to renovate it, it had to meet ADA code. So they had to make like a backcountry hut that's 6 miles from the road, like ADA accessible to like meet all of this, code that had been in place. And like, there's like, you kind of start to see like the stacking up of like, well, in this situation where like, technically this is wilderness, and like, but we're talking about renovating a hut that's in that wilderness, and it's a 6 mile steep rocky trail from the trailhead, but like everything needs to be to code to be 36 inches wide for a wheelchair. It starts to like kind of all like jumble together, being like, what? And I chose that example. I'm with you. I think, I don't know if events are the same as exposure. I think exposure to wilderness is a really important thing. And we're not going to get that exposure kind of with our current setup. A lot of wilderness is really, really far from more, public areas. The letter of the law and the tone of the law are the things you guys were chatting a little bit last time in regard to the Fernando cheating situation. Yeah. I think it also applies here. And like Finn, I think I like giving you a hard time and busting your balls, because I know at the end of the day, like, you probably are more in line with the League of Conservation Voters than not in line with them. But when this was written, and like beautiful, like, nature writers, Aldo Leopold, like helped write this amazing piece of legislature. it was like the intent of the law. And at that point in time, like we just missed. Western states came about, 10 years after the Wilderness Act. But had they known that humans would start migrating in ways where like 200 or 300 of them would all run the same path together, through these areas, I think that would kind of fall more in line with the tone of the law than the letter of the law, which is you can't have groups of larger than 10. Like, I don't think cattlemen, and maybe Big Cow will come after me, Big Beef, but like, I don't think that the Wilderness Act really envisioned billionaire ranchers to be able to put all their cows up on wilderness land for 8 months of the year so that they could have huge offsets on their ranches, that the cows are on for the other 4 months of the year. Like, that doesn't really feel in line with the intent of the law. And I love having this conversation with mountain bikers because I love mountain biking, but like, do I actually think mountain bikes should be allowed in wilderness area? Technically, it's a machine. Like, are there some exceptions for that? Well, technically, we see occasionally people using chainsaws in wilderness areas to do more like drastic trail cleanup or, landslide cleanup and stuff. And like, I think you're in the right that, were we able to revisit this and say, hey, if in this instance, people are going to be running through, we're not going to have any vehicles, any bikes or anything like that in the wilderness areas. We're going to hike this stuff in so that, the aid stations, whatever our impact is absolutely minimal. Like, sure.
Yeah.
What it does is it also opens up other interest groups, and the other interest groups are oil and gas. And like, that is what's at odds here. So like, talking about the Bear Nutrition and Border Patrol patch at this time with how sensitive immigration is pretty similar to talking about canceling the Wilderness Act at a time when public lands are actively up for sale. Totally.
Yeah, I think, just to interject really quick, had we spent any more time actually talking about this as a topic on our last episode, I think it would have been conveyed much more clearly that we all agree with everything you just said there, Jeff. And none of us, I don't think, on that episode have had any intention of communicating a desire to revoke or otherwise overturn the Wilderness Act. It was,
the timeliness of it was amazing because like Utah literally voted to protect 1.5 million acres of public land like the day you guys launched that episode. And it brings up a question of like, hey, ultra runners are interested in accessing public land or like wilderness land. So are mountain bikers. And like, this community is not alone in like looking at, actually, what if public lands ended up in a different person's hands? Does that mean I can go snowmobile to access like all of this terrain that's way too far away to ski access or snowboard access in the winter? Like, these thoughts are being had. I think as outdoor enthusiasts and like greater members of the, outdoor state of recreationalists, like the focus needs to be, they're currently protected to be, conserved, harvested at a sustainable rate so that we have these huge carbon sinks, so that we have these like beautiful natural places that we can go. And like, that's where I think a lot of us feel ourselves is in the woods, in the mountains. It's what brings us like this, spirit of vivaciousness, vitality.
I just think that if we want to really truly value these places and convert society more into this like environmentalist worldview that we share, you have to create these ceremonies in those places that are bigger in scale. Like the way it's currently set up, as we've both talked about, it's very you get to engage with these places in a very individualistic kind of antisocial way. It's like either yourself going out there or you in a very small group. And I think there's a world of difference in how much impact it could have on society if the things are bigger in scale.
I think the numbers are like the biggest thing in favor of your argument, Finn, because in 1964, we were looking at maybe 100 million Americans, and those 100 million Americans, 1% of them could get out and actually enjoy wilderness and really care for it and speak up and defend it and advocate for it. We're in a 360 million, populous country now. Maybe I would say wilderness accessibility has gotten harder in the last, 30, 40 years, but like, maybe just the numbers right now, if we want more advocates for wilderness and public lands, we need to make accessing them easier. And like, I think of initiatives like to get young kids out, again, I grew up in New Hampshire. So Outdoor RX is like, let's get kids from Boston into the White Mountains and like show them what kind of untrodden nature is like. Like, that's an amazing initiative. I do think that like the vision of getting more trail races into these really special places is in line with the intent of, or the spirit of the Wilderness Act. But I'd also say like, I don't necessarily agree with approaching it from like, well, if the US is going to stand up against something like Snowdonia or UTMB, then we need to have access to like, Half Dome and like these other protected areas so we can make the most epic race.
Is that what I sound like?
No, I was actually an amalgamation of your voice, Brett's voice, and Finn's voice all into one ball. Yeah. I just say that because like there's something to be said about experiencing those places not in a race setting. And
absolutely,
I love the FKT side of the sport for that reason. I'm sorry Brett can't be here to hear that, but like you can go move through those places even in a fast, competitive way. It's just like not with 300 other people.
I'll say one last thing because I know we're almost at time and we should switch topics just to close up. One of my favorite books of all time, it's called I've mentioned it on the pod before. It's called A Philosophy of Regional Planning. And it is Benton Mackay's sort of vision for how American society would interact with these places in the future. And basically he was writing it in the 1910s, 1920s. And he looked at all of the factories. He looked at industrialization. He was like, I think the biggest problem in society increasingly over the next few decades is going to be the problem of leisure. How are people going to spend all their free time? Like he foresaw the issues that we're kind of starting to realize right now, where it's like a lot of us are going to have a lot more free time. So what do we do with that? And when he thought about the Appalachian Trail, and his original version for the Appalachian Trail was that these shelters were going to be way bigger than just shelters. They were going to be these like spiritual centers along that trail where like people at scale would convene and appreciate nature more. So like, yes, he was, I think, a supporter of the Wilderness Act in 1964, but I also think he would say, if he was here today, that inevitably there's going to be a greater scale of people, like you said, Jeff, above that 1% initial, that are going to want to interact and convene at a larger scale. We have to account for that. And also, I should remove my bias because I'm a race director. I don't want to see any profit in this. Like if we were to be able to see a world where this would be feasible, I would love to see it become a totally public sector thing where you remove profit from it, you remove commercialism from it, and it's like an agency in the government that administers these events. Like I don't want any profit to commingle with this stuff if it would make this whole situation worse.
Maybe two quick things. But first, yeah, I think we kind of just like brushed over this sort of jokingly in our last episode. And again, maybe misconstrued or didn't clarify importantly some of our feelings on the subject. I really just lament the reality that our best terrain in the United States is not terrain that we can show off to people traveling in a race format. Like I kind of lament that reality. I don't lament that reality and want to overturn the laws protecting those lands. To the point of all this conversation we've been having, I do hope, and I'm not educated enough to know, but I wonder and I hope that there is maybe a constructive way forward. But I recognize that inserting any flexibility into this law or this set of laws is probably a much more slippery slope in the United States in terms of exploitation of the land we're talking about. Probably a much more slippery slope in the United States than it is in some of the other places that we've had the opportunity to run, like in the Alps or in the UK or wherever. That's one thing I want to say. Sorry if you have anything to add, Jeff.
Oh, just like that's why Hard Rock is so special to me and
Yeah.
why I would love to run that race if you're listening, Dale.
You said you do want to run Hard Rock, Jeff? Okay.
Thanks. If you're listening, Dale.
This is like your first time ever saying that.
I think so.
I think Tyler Green actually also wants to run Hard Rock someday. I'm pretty sure. And then one other thing I want to add about this, Finn, is the wilderness. We used the wilderness areas as kind of an example of when we had this conversation on our last episode. But that's actually not even like my frustrations at trying to put a race on in the Wasatch Mountains. I have never tried to put on, like, to permit an event in a wilderness area. I know that is off limits. I have been very frustrated with other red tape in the race and land use permitting process that doesn't even involve wilderness areas. And it's more about how, like, our most fun terrain, yeah, a lot of it is on wilderness areas, but a lot of it is just on like these either user created trails that aren't formal Forest System trails, Forest Service system trails, may or may not be on Forest Service property, may be on like Salt Lake City Corporation property, maybe on private property like Solitude Mountain Resort or Alta Ski Resort, Alta Ski area. So there are other frustrations that I was kind of lamenting or addressing in our last conversation that I have encountered that have prevented me from being able to create an event here in, or I'm not in the Wasatch right now, but in the Wasatch at home, other frustrations and challenges that I have faced that have nothing to do with overturning or interfering with any wilderness protections. So I just want to clarify that.
On our end, like I got to work with Jamil to permit the Aspen Backcountry Marathon to bring that back this upcoming summer in August. Like that permitting went quite smoothly. And in a lot of ways, it seems like it might be who is in that Forest Service role, who is in that BLM role. Like, do they understand what you're trying to do? And like, can you get them out there kind of in the area and help them better understand it?
I think I told you guys this, but earlier this year, I was in our Salt Lake Ranger District office with a couple of the folks that work there talking about a potential ultramarathon route, and had pulled up the map and they had highlighted things where there could be issues or whatever. And they're great folks and I love the work that they do, but it was really frustrating to me that it was abundantly clear that I was more familiar with the trails in the land area of land that they manage. I was more familiar with the trails than they were. And that was just another kind of frustrating example of like, there's, I don't know. I think there's ways that we can work together and that trail runners actually have a lot of knowledge and a lot of care for the land that we recreate on, that there could be a really productive way to still show off some more terrain that we have in the US. That's my frustration.
This is a shout out to the audience to close this up. After last episode, there were a couple people that reached out and said, go read this, go check out that. And one of the books that I picked up at the library yesterday, it's called Ishmael by Daniel Quinn.
Oof, Ishmael's a rough one, man.
Is it rough?
I mean, it broke my 18-year-old heart and spirit.
Yeah. So it kind of fits into this discussion. I'm excited to read it, but I was going to say another call out again. Like I do feel strongly here, but I also know that there are a lot of facts I don't have, and I very well could be wrong in what I'm assuming. So like, if there's anything people can suggest that I read, et cetera, just to have a more well-rounded point of view. Jeff, I know you have a background in this. I'm excited. So
favorite thing I learned, by the way, I learned out of all this, I learned a lot, but one very interesting thing I learned was that the Lake District in England, where I was running a couple weekends ago, and Snowdonia National Park, where I ran 100 miles a couple weekends ago, one of the, like I kept telling you guys, it's one of the most beautiful places I've ever run in my life. And I learned that it's all below natural tree line, and in fact used to be covered in trees. Like those mountains and mountainsides used to be covered in trees, and could have been anywhere from, I think, 2,000 to 10,000 years ago, but humankind like logged and cleared those mountains, and there's a reason they look the way they do today. Not sure exactly what to take away from that, other than like sort of a different appreciation, a different way, different lens to view that landscape through. But it is remarkable to imagine what it must have looked like 5,000 years ago and the impact that humans had on it. Like totally, it would look like a steep Virginia if it were still covered in trees. And instead it's one of the most, I mean, I love Virginia, but like it's one of the most remarkable landscapes I've ever seen. And that was like a striking thing for me to learn that came out of this whole conversation.
Wow.
Do we have to call it, Finn, or do we have time for one more, or the best thing we saw on the internet?
Let's do the best thing we saw on the internet.
We got time. It's a long run.
Yeah, it's a long run. Okay, Mike, best thing you found.
Oh, I didn't come with anything great. However, it's not necessarily on the internet, but it's related to the internet. Best thing that I discovered in the past week or so, in the past week, was these hover air drones, dude.
Yes.
Yeah, Tyler Green and Rachel have one. And I went on a run with Tyler the other day, and he brought his drone, and we played around with it a little bit. And it's like, for people that don't know, I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. Have you seen these, Jeff or Finn?
I've seen Tyler post video of like.
Have you seen one in person?
No.
Have you seen it yet, Finn?
Yes, only because Tyler took it out on a run one time.
It's cool. It's really, I mean, it's simple, like in concept technology, not technically simple, but in concept, it's simple. It's like, it's just a drone that you don't control. Like you don't have a remote for it. It just locks in on you as the subject, and it's got different modes, whether you want it to be in front of you, facing you, or up above you 8 feet, up above you 16 feet, or following behind you. There's like ski mode and bike mode and all this stuff, but it just locks in on you as the subject and follows you. And I mean, as runners, there's not much it can't do to follow us. Like you can bomb downhill as fast as you want or whatever, and it can get some
through the trees. It's okay.
I mean, I have read that people have lost them either to tree branches or what have you, but like I saw it do some pretty impressive maneuvers while we were running downhill, and it was like tracking me as the subject, where it almost hit like some scrub oak branches, but somehow sensed them and avoided them. And then like the footage when you're running downhill, especially if there's trees around, it's like a little bit chaotic because it'll be like off to the left, and then it'll like see a tree and get close to you, and then like go over to the other side, but more or less stay locked on you the whole time. And it just,
are these like a couple $100, or are they pretty expensive?
I don't know what they cost.
That sounds cool.
It's really cool.
Like, I certainly feel like I don't want to ask people to take footage of me running, but I also feel pressure from sponsors to post footage of me running.
It's super light. Like it's lighter than like my DJI Osmo camera that I film video with if I'm on the run. Like it's lighter than that, and it just folds right up, slide it right in your pack, take it out on the summit or whenever you want. Really, really cool thing.
Okay, I've got two. Number one, Mike McMonagle released a vlog earlier today, and one of the important announcements in this vlog, in which he was using this drone, by the way, was he has officially identified and named the Salt Lake Daddies and Baddies as the counterpart to the Boulder Boys. So go over to the Shit in the Woods YouTube channel. I'll let the viewers and listeners check that out themselves. My second example, and you guys already know this one because I posted it in our group chat, but there is a brand out there which I discovered through my friend Sam Losi here in Salt Lake City. I don't know how to pronounce this, but it is spelled GNUHR. So I think it's newer.com. And they almost look to me like a Satisfy challenger or Satisfy adjacent apparel and gear company. But they have, like, you go to the website, it's a pretty funky website, www.newer.com. They have long sleeve shirts, jackets, a really interesting take on a running vest, some extra layer outerwear, hats, some cool gloves. Really funky. And again, like a lot of the branding, it looks sort of Satisfy adjacent. So, and they're based out of Portland, Oregon. Dude, the vest is insane. Isn't that vest crazy? It almost looks like it's like cloth.
It's like, first of all, it's like construction orange.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there were a couple different colors there, right? But I mean, maybe. To me, like, I think there's a lot to be pulled from that vest, which is they're using laser cut or like laser printed.
Is it seamless?
I don't know if it's seamless, but instead of mesh, they're like making those perforations and like designed kind of holes through laser cutting, which like gives you a lot more freedom and like ability to shape things. So like a classic mesh is just going to have a kind of 2-directional weave, whereas laser cut, you can really like make it so, oh, I want this to like perfectly fit this soft flask. I'll, design these perforations in a way where it'll do that. So laser cut technology is just super cool. I think we'll see a lot more of it in apparel and probably hydration vests.
Okay, they're also wearing, the models are wearing same construction orange, and I'm not criticizing, by the way.
No, it's a statement. It's a fashion statement.
They're wearing gloves that are like almost
Long
it's like
gloves.
a glove, at least elbow length though, like toilet cleaning glove type length, or maybe even glove all the way from finger up into finger. We call them fingers in our household, but they're fingers.
It's like glove meets arm sleeve, but it kind of looks like what Katharine Hepburn would wear when she smokes a cigarette with a still.
And there's actually a lighter in the pack. If you zoom in on one of the photos, in the back of the pack, there's a lighter. So that's pretty.
Maybe
fun.
That's the
10 essentials when you go into the wilderness, man. You need a lighter.
It's true.
Anyways, yeah, that definitely interesting.
There's some wild face masks too. The best thing I found on the internet this week is in this ultra running magazine. I just read this story this morning about Kaizen Run Club. The motto is 1% better every single day. And it's an awesome story, but what made me smile the most was this like final statement here. Kaizen is a reminder that incremental improvement is the key to long-term success. What started small has evolved into a community where everyone supports one another in becoming the best versions of themselves. It's a reminder that the first step is just to get started. Don't wait for everything to be perfect. Create something and then focus on making it better. And I really liked that final takeaway. I think there's I certainly feel pressures in certain elements, specifically around like run community and trying to build community of like, oh, I really want this thing to like be right, but like just create something and then make it better. Yeah. I don't know. Thought that would be a good one for you to hear, Finn, with your race director Twisted Fork coming up.